I thank Robbie and Stuart for their strength, to Dr. Zarka, to all of the honorees who are here today. And I know that through the years you've had so many amazing honorees, which makes this such a humbling experience to be here with you all tonight, knowing just how much has been trailblazed before us. The strength and the courage in this room is overwhelming. And I feel like it is a burden for us, when you're not here in Washington, D.C., to be achieving results on your behalf. And I get the honor of introducing one of your honorees, Congressman Ted Deutch. And I'm going to say great things about him. I don't know if this is allowed. He's a Democrat and I'm a Republican. I hope I don't get in too much trouble, but I only have nice things to say about him. So people often ask me, of the Democrats, who are your favorites? And I always mention Ted Deutch. I mention Josh Gottheimer from New Jersey. He's a great member. I don't know if you had a chance to meet Josh. Elliot Engel and I are actually related. I don't know if you know this. Actually, today we had a Foreign Affairs Committee hearing, and he was talking about his mom, who is first cousins with my great aunt. Go figure, right? We're all related somehow. Ted is someone who will stand up for what's right, even if that means bucking his own party, even if that means it being an uncomfortable moment. And we've seen it on the floor of the House of Representatives just this year and over the last couple of months, with his courage in standing in the well of the House of Representatives to stand up against anti-Semitism, to fight for all of those college students who are relying on us to do something about it, not to turn a blind eye, to stand with the United States-Israel relationship and to strengthen it, to ensure that the United Nations, which was created to fight against what in many respects it has become. I have enormous respect for him. You couldn't have picked a greater honoree this evening. He's someone who I look up to for his principles, passion, and his courage to stand up to anyone for what he knows in his heart is the right thing, as I know so many of you do as well on every day in your lives. Wherever you are from, know that Ted Deutch is here fighting for you. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my great colleague from the state of Florida, Ted Deutch. Oh, should we do that? Lee. Right there. Good evening, everyone. Wow. Well, Lee Zeldin is a good friend, and I walked up and thanked him for that incredibly generous introduction. And he said, "Well, it's just like you wrote it for me." And then I reminded him what I wrote was about 8 pages longer. I'm really grateful, Lee, for the kind introduction, for the many opportunities that we have to work together. I'm glad that you're being recognized for your leadership. You touched, and we've touched on just a few of the items. The battle that we've waged around the world to recognize Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, to stop drawing a line between a political arm and a terror arm. There is only one Hezbollah. It is a terrorist organization, and I am proud of the work that Congressman Zeldin does to push the rest of the world to acknowledge that. And I'm really grateful for what Lee did a
on the Taylor Force Act, and I didn't, and I apologize for not knowing, Stuart and Robbie, that you were being honored. But it's really special for me. Lee will attest to this. For all of his efforts on Capitol Hill in pushing forward, in making sure that pay for slay is not acceptable to the United States Congress and the United States government, for all of his efforts and the work of Congressman Lamborn and so many others, ultimately the Taylor Force Act became law because of the powerful life that was led by Taylor Force that was tragically cut short by terrorists, and because of the incredible advocacy that we've seen by Stuart and Robbie. And I want to thank you for your leadership, for giving us, and in particular Congressman Zeldin, the opportunity to help lead and shepherd the Taylor Force Act through on Capitol Hill. I had, we had the privilege of meeting last year at the embassy, the embassy's 4th of July party, and it was a highlight for me. I'll just say one last thing. I don't want to embarrass you, but I want you to know all that we do, all of us, whether we serve in Congress, activists in our own community, leaders in whatever walk of life we're in, all of us who care so deeply about standing up for the U.S.-Israel relationship, about making sure that terrorism can never pay, about doing everything we can to make sure that American values are reflected in our American policies. All of that is epitomized so beautifully by what the two of you have done in memory of Taylor, and I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. One last word about Lee. He didn't ask for this, but that was such a kind introduction that when I have the chance to go back to my district, where I represent a good number of Lee's relatives, I will be sure to tell them that I saw him and he did a magnificent job at the Emmett dinner. Lee, one more comment about Lee. So Lee and I are hallmates also. And of all of the things that we compete against each other for, and I'm not talking about on the partisan side, I'm talking about in a very constructive way as members who both care so deeply about the U.S.-Israel relationship and fighting anti-Semitism. The other competition that seems ongoing is to see whose office has the bigger mezuzah on the door. I've not measured, but I think you actually might win. Yeah, so congratulations again, Lee, and thanks for everything that you do. To Sarah Stern and David Green and the leadership of Emmett, thank you for all of the work that you do, and I'm really honored, really honored to be here tonight. I appreciate the recognition. I think my recognition tonight is in part because of what Congressman Zeldin has already talked about and what is in the forefront of so many of our minds, which is the work that we all need to do to confront and combat anti-Semitism. A few years ago, I was invited to speak at the United Nations General Assembly. They did a special session on anti-Semitism, and there were dozens of ambassadors, UN ambassadors from all around the world. And as I explained in my talk at the UN, it doesn't matter whether you have an enormous Jewish community in your country or virtually none, or frankly, none at all. If there is anti-Semitism in your country, anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine, and it means that you also face a lack of tolerance, you face hatred, you face evil, and unless you confront it, it will only spread. But back in 2015, when I delivered that speech, I never could have imagined that we would be at this moment in 2019. That as I stood there and warned world leaders about deadly attacks in France and in Belgium and in Sweden and other countries, that we would soon be facing deadly attacks in our own country against the Jewish community. In the last 8 months, our community and our nation has grieved 2 deadly anti-Semitic attacks. Last October's attack at Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, where 11 Jews were gunned down in synagogue as Jews. They were killed during Shabbat services, including a 97-year-old Bubby, the current and former president of the synagogue, 2, by all accounts, incredibly sweet brothers, and so many others. I felt that pain passionately, as I know everyone in this room did. The idea that a gunman would enter into a synagogue Shabbat morning is so jarring because it could have just as easily been my synagogue. It could just as easily have been the synagogue that my family attends. It could just as easily have been a peaceful moment of reflection, of davening in our own shul that was interrupted and changed forever by gunfire. Why this synagogue? Why this day? How could we not have seen it coming? Well, in the days and weeks after, we learned the gunman was inspired by racist, anti-Semitic, xenophobic ideology of white nationalists. He picked Tree of Life because they had just hosted a week before National Refugee Shabbat. He claimed that Jews were busy supporting refugees from Central America, traveling to our southern border. And his toxic ideology, his twisted accusations, aren't innate. They're not born. He learned them, and they're dangerous. And we know that hateful rhetoric reverberates. Its toxicity diffuses throughout our culture. Anti-Semitic conspiracy theories aren't harmless. They're not political fodder. They leach out of our coarse political dialogue and they become deadly. I'm not going to give the shooter a voice, but we know from evidence collected after the shooting that horrific act was a response to an anti-Semitic and racist rhetoric around immigration in our country. That was that attack. Tree of Life attack was followed months later by an attack at Poway, Chabad, where Lori Gilbert Kay was killed. A woman who was remembered as an amazing mother and an amazing wife. She made challahs for the community. She felt a deep connection to Judaism. The Poway killer also had a connection to a dark web network of white supremacists. He used 8chan to announce his plan, the same platform used by the killer in New Zealand. He cited an attack in Christchurch and Pittsburgh as motivations, and he claims that he was radicalized in 18 months, which is just the blink of an eye. After his attack, his Facebook page was filled with posts of praise for his deadly work against the Jews. There is an unquestionable rise in support in our country for neo-Nazis. ADL statistics recorded a 182% rise in white supremacist propaganda. And just 2 years ago, of course, we all remember the jarring images of people marching in Virginia chanting, "Jews will not replace us." But even with eyes wide open to anti-Semitism, those chants reverberate still. And so I can't none of us can let those haunting memories stop us in this fight, and we can't allow them to stop us from showing our pride in Judaism, our commitment to religious freedom, and our fight against anti-Semitism. And we have to be united against that fight. When we stand divided, the anti-Semites see weakness. Over the last few years, there's also been a clear uptick in the number of white supremacist incidents on college campuses. It's been the highest sometimes at schools with little or no Jewish population. This I just learned last week. By targeting students vulnerable to its anti-Semitic propaganda, groups like Identity Europa and Patriot Front are trying to build up their following of supporters to share their anti-Semitic and other hate-based ideologies. There's an orchestrated strategy in place right in front of our eyes to incite hatred and even violence against the Jewish community. It demands action by our government, coordination by law enforcement and intelligence agencies to stop it, and it demands that we speak out and condemn it wherever we see it. And anti-Semitism is complex. There is no single source or reason for it. And just as we've seen this surge by extreme right-wing nationalists, we've also seen a rise in anti-Semitism on the extreme left. Back when I was speaking in New York at the General Assembly, I never would have imagined that I would have to stand on the floor of the House of Representatives where I serve and explain to my colleagues why lies about Jews and money and Jews in power are anti-Semitic. I never thought that I would have to explain that because of anti-Semitism over millennia, that millions of Jews, including some in my own family, so all of us, some connection, millions of Jews have been hated and targeted and expelled, driven from their countries, attacked and killed, and nearly exterminated. But as many of you know, back in March, I did have to do that. I had to go to the House floor and I had to ask, why is it that anti-Semitism is not worthy of being singularly condemned? I am a Democrat. I am proud to fight for democratic values of equal opportunity and equal treatment under law, but I will never waver in condemning any and all forms of anti-Semitism from my colleagues, whether Republican or Democrat. Now, several years ago, when I heard a colleague inappropriately invoke the Holocaust to make a political point, I sat down with him and explained that language like that is so offensive to us, particularly so offensive to Holocaust survivors. When another colleague accused Soros and Steyer and Bloomberg of buying elections and invoked that classic anti-Semitic trope, I condemned it. And when one of my Democratic colleagues repeatedly used the classic anti-Semitic lies that Jews control the world, that Jews care only about money, that support for Israel is akin to foreign allegiance, I didn't hesitate to condemn that as well. Look, it is important on this last point about foreign allegiance especially that we speak out. I will not allow anyone to question my patriotism because I know that it is Jews like me and Congressman Zeldin who serve in the United States Congress, and people like my father and so many people in this room. My dad earned a Purple Heart fighting the Nazis at the Battle of the Bulge. And my father and the veterans in this room and all of us who love our country are proud Americans, and suggesting otherwise is deeply offensive and deeply dangerous. The fact is we've got to be clear-eyed about the time that we're living in. We're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism on the right and on the left. There are growing voices calling for the elimination of the State of Israel, people who mask their anti-Semitism under the guise of anti-Zionism, people who support the singling out of Israel through their BDS campaign, and who decry the power of, quote, the Israel lobby and the Jewish elites. Mark my words, the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, the movement to apply a double standard against Israel, to demonize Israel, to delegitimize the only Jewish state in the world, is innately and unquestionably anti-Semitic. Now, by now I'm sure we've all heard, Lee mentioned this, and we've all heard personal stories from students who have experienced anti-Semitism on campus who don't feel safe walking across the campus, walking across the quad, wearing a kippah, wearing a Magen David, showing their pride in their religion in the state of Israel. They're fearful to do that because of the jeers and taunts they endure from other students and organizations that exist for the sole purpose of opposing Israel. That's happening now in the United States in 2019. Now in Congress, there is broad bipartisan support to oppose BDS. And I am grateful to Congressman Zeldin and Congressman Schneider for their resolution, which will put all of us on record clearly opposing BDS. That resolution would also tackle all efforts to delegitimize Israel. It has nearly 300 co-sponsors, Democrats and Republicans from across the country, and we need the opportunity to publicly show that opposition to BDS by voting on that resolution soon. Now, for centuries, Jews have been used as the scapegoat. We've too often been the other that empires and nations attempt to use to place blame for all society's problems. Even the term anti-Semitism before it existed, there was a pattern of hatred and discrimination against Jews that led to expulsions, pogroms, and more. In 2015, Jeffrey Goldberg wrote a piece on anti-Semitism in Europe, which I think really highlighted the challenge that we all face. He said, and I quote, "The church blamed the Jews for killing Jesus. Voltaire blamed the Jews for inventing Christianity. In the febrile minds of anti-Semites, Jews were usurers and well poisoners and spreaders of disease. Jews were the creators of both communism and capitalism. They were clannish, but also cosmopolitan, cowardly and warmongering, self-righteous moralists, and defilers of culture." This is the point. Anti-Semitism is not relegated to one extreme political view, and it is crucial that we keep up the fight and that that fight be bipartisan. That is exactly why I helped form the Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism and remain a co-chair along with my colleagues Nita Lowy, Kay Granger, Elliot Engel, Chris Smith, Mark Vesey, Randy Weber, and Brian Fitzpatrick, because we cannot allow the issue to fall to partisanship. We can't be in a place where the threats against our community, violence against shuls and schools, attacks on Jews as they attend Shabbat services or celebrate the Chagim, where any of these are used by Democrats or Republicans to attack one another. And we can't allow either party to become home to anti-Semites. We can't allow anti-Semitism to become weaponized to divide us. Anti-Semitism today is far too dangerous. It's too deadly. And we need a united front against it. In fact, we've got to do more to encourage countries around the world to act in defense of their own Jewish communities. Last week, the Secretary General of the Organization of American States stated unequivocally his commitment to combating anti-Semitism, including adopting the widely respected and widely used definition of anti-Semitism. This follows a similar move by the European Parliament in 2017. The Bipartisan Task Force Combating Anti-Semitism celebrated both, but we need to do more here. We are more effective when we're united. When we speak together with a bipartisan voice, we show the anti-Semites that they have no place in our society. When the United States government uses unequivocal language to condemn anti-Semitism, all of it, it shows the anti-Semites that they will find no allies in the leadership ranks of our government. I'm reminded of a Hasidic phrase that was recently repeated by Rabbi Yisrael Goldstein, a survivor of the Poway shooting, who said, "A little light drives out much darkness." There is so much light in this room tonight, so much light driving out that darkness every day in the work that you do. As a community, while we face rising threats, we've got to come together to do what is in the best interest of safety and security. My commitment to you is simple. Just as it is to my constituents, to the American Jewish community, and to all Americans who fight any and all forms of anti-Semitism, wherever it comes from and whoever invokes it. We must continue, and I will continue to do battle every day in every way that is necessary to take on, to stand up to, and to defeat anti-Semitism in our country. I thank you. I thank you for recognizing my commitment. I look forward to working with all of you in this important work, and I close with this. I'm the chairman of the Middle East, North Africa, and International Terrorism Subcommittee. I am Ted Deutch, a Jew from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. We will fight anti-Semitism, we will stand up against BDS, and we will stand up for Israel, and we will stand up for Israel's defenders. And I'm proud to be a lifelong member of the pro-Israel community. But where I came from in Pennsylvania, I was the pro-Israel community. I was the first Jew, and often the only Jew that most of my friends knew, and I was certainly the only person who spoke to them about the importance of Israel. To be surrounded here tonight to receive this award by a group this committed to the work that we all do together, for all of that, I am immensely grateful, and that, my friends, is the absolute emet. Thank you very much, everyone.